My in-laws thought I didn't belong, they never invited me to family dinners. Welcome back with a new real shock story. Before we start, comment and tell me which city you're watching from. At the end, don't forget to subscribe and rate it from 0 to 10. Let's enjoy the story, everyone.
I remember the first time I noticed it. At first, it seemed so small I almost ignored it, like the quiet hum of something in the background that I couldn't quite name. But it grew, slowly, until it became impossible to overlook. My name is Alec Rose. This story I'm about to tell you, it's mine. It's not made up. It happened to me. And if you think family is supposed to be a safe place where you belong, you might want to sit down before you hear the rest. It all started in the first year after I married. At first, everything felt like a dream. I had always hoped for family, someone who cared, who welcomed me. My own family lived far away, and I thought marriage was the bridge to belonging. My husband's family seemed warm when I first met them. Smiles, polite words, offers of coffee, all felt like an opening. I told myself I had found a new home, but it didn't take long before something shifted. At first, it was just little things, invitations that never came, a glance that lingered too long and then vanished, conversations that stopped abruptly when I walked into the room. I told myself I was imagining it, surely I was. I wanted to believe they just hadn't gotten used to me yet, but the quiet doubt started to grow inside me. One evening, I prepared myself for my first big family dinner. I wanted to impress them, so I cooked a dish I'd perfected for weeks. I imagined the warmth of laughter, of conversation, the comfort of being included. But that evening, the invitations never came. I waited by my phone, telling myself they must be busy. But then I heard laughter from the next room, just faint enough for my heart to sink. I was not invited, not this time, not ever, it seemed. The silence became heavier after that night. Not the silence of absence, it was a silence that carried meaning, a silence that screamed without words. I started noticing patterns. My husband would avoid inviting me to gatherings. If I did show up, the atmosphere shifted. People would talk quieter, turn their chairs so I was out of sight. I remember sitting once at a family brunch, smiling politely, while laughter and stories flowed around me and no one looked my way. I wanted to confront them. I wanted to ask what was wrong, but every time I opened my mouth, I felt something hold me back. Fear, confusion, maybe denial. It was easier to swallow the hurt than face what it might mean. Then there was the night I overheard it. I wasn't supposed to hear. I was passing by the kitchen when I heard hushed voices. I stopped. They spoke just low enough that I almost didn't catch it. But I did. The words cut through me. She doesn't belong. My chest tightened, my breath hitched, my hands trembled. It was not just exclusion anymore, it was something cruel. From that moment, everything changed. I started noticing even more the way invitations disappeared, how conversations paused when I entered a room, the coldness behind smiles. It wasn't subtle anymore. It was deliberate, and it wasn't about family tradition or awkwardness. It was about something deeper, something they never wanted to admit. There was one dinner I'll never forget. My husband's family gathered in the living room, talking, eating, celebrating something I wasn't invited to. I stood outside, leaning against the wall, listening to laughter I wasn't part of. I wanted to go in, to be included, but I didn't. My body froze. There was no courage left that night. Only hurt. It was a moment that stayed with me for weeks, months even. I thought about it constantly. I replayed the scene over and over, questioning everything. Was it something I did, something I said, or was it because of who I was, my skin, my voice, the life I came from? I couldn't stop myself from asking the question, why? I began searching for answers quietly, watching, listening, trying to collect pieces of something I couldn't yet name, and I began seeing the truth. It wasn't a misunderstanding, it wasn't awkwardness, it was rejection. Not the loud kind that shatters a moment, but a quiet, unrelenting kind that builds over time, until it becomes a wall you can't climb. One afternoon, I decided to test it. I told my husband I wanted to come to dinner with his family. He hesitated. Then he said, "They're busy tonight." I didn't push it, but my heart sank, because I knew I wasn't busy. They just didn't want me there. That night, I lay awake, feeling every emotion flood through me: hurt, confusion, disbelief, sadness. I wanted to believe that love could bridge this, but the more I thought about it, the clearer it became. Love alone couldn't break silence. Love couldn't tear down a wall that had been built quietly. stone by stone. And then it happened, the thing that broke me open. I overheard a conversation again. This time, I was closer. The words weren't hushed. Not completely. She's different. She never belonged. The sting of those words still burns in my chest. That night, I realized this wasn't something that would go away on its own. It wasn't just about missing a dinner. It was about being told I didn't belong, and no one had the courage to say it to my face. I knew then that something had to change. I could no longer pretend this was accidental. I could no longer ignore the quiet cruelty that had been happening for months. But I also knew confronting it wouldn't be easy, because once you see the truth, you can't unsee it. And the question became, would I confront it, or would I walk away forever? The next morning, I woke up feeling heavier than I had in weeks. My body ached not physically, but in a way that only comes from carrying a weight no one else can see. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my thoughts tangled in knots. Part of me wanted to tell him, my husband, but another part of me feared what would happen if I did. Would he stand beside me, or would he let this quietly destroy me? I got up and moved through the day like a ghost. Every movement felt distant, every sound muffled. At work, I smiled politely at my colleagues, but inside, I was replaying that moment over and over, the words I heard in the kitchen. She doesn't belong. They haunted me. They weren't just words. They were a verdict. They were a label that was being quietly placed on me, without explanation, without confrontation. That night, I tried talking to my husband. I said it gently at first, almost like testing the waters. Do you think they see me differently? He looked away. I saw something in his eyes, something between guilt and fear. It's not like that, he said, but the hesitation in his voice told me more than his words ever could. I realized then that even if he wanted to defend me, the silence around me was stronger. I wasn't just dealing with their actions, I was dealing with a system of unspoken rules, traditions, and prejudices that had been quietly taught, repeated, and enforced over years. And the worst part, they didn't see it as wrong. To them, this was normal. Days turned into weeks. I tried pushing myself to be part of family gatherings. I showed up uninvited once, smiling, bringing my own dish, but they looked through me like I was a shadow in their light. The laughter didn't stop, for MIT stopped at the moment I stepped in. I felt invisible, not because no one spoke to me, but because they had decided not to include me. And it hurt in a way I couldn't explain. It wasn't just about missing meals or invitations anymore. It became about my place in the world, about the quiet but sharp truth that I was being told without a single confrontation. I didn't belong. I started asking myself things I never thought I would. Was I not enough? Was my presence unwanted because of who I was? My skin, my background. One evening, I decided to stop hiding my feelings. I went to him, my husband, and spoke honestly. I feel like I'm invisible in your family, like I'm not welcome. My voice shook. His silence filled the room. Finally, he said, it's not about you. They just have their ways. But his words felt like a shield, not an answer. They didn't heal anything. That night, I cried quietly in our bedroom. I cried for the dinners I wasn't invited to, for the moments I had been erased, for the words I overheard but couldn't take back. I cried for the truth that I had been rejected in a place where I thought I would be safe. The next day, I found myself walking through the neighborhood we lived in, letting the tears fall. I didn't know where I was going. I just needed to move. My mind replayed every dinner, every glance, every silent exclusion. And then I realized I had been training myself to believe it was my fault, that maybe, somehow, I deserved to be left out. That thought terrified me. It terrified me because, if I believed it, I would stop fighting. I would stop trying to find my place, and maybe that was what they wanted to quietly teach me, to accept that I didn't belong. The days after became a battle. Every time I stepped into their home, I felt a tightening in my chest. Every smile felt forced. Every conversation felt like walking on glass. And the more I tried to speak up, the quieter my voice became. I was losing myself. Then came the breaking point. It wasn't one dramatic moment, it was smaller, quieter, but it broke me all the same. We had a family event, and once again, I wasn't invited. I wasn't told about it. I only knew because someone mentioned it later. It wasn't just hurt anymore, it was humiliation. To be excluded without even the courtesy of a reason. It was worse than being told outright. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake thinking about what it meant to be rejected quietly, without confrontation. It felt like a slow erasure of my existence. and I knew something had to change. I couldn't keep living in silence. I couldn't keep swallowing this hurt. So I began to plan. I began thinking about how I would tell my story, not just to him, not just to them, but to the world, because I realized my story wasn't just mine. There are people everywhere who live with quiet exclusion, who feel the sting of being told without words that they don't belong. And the truth is, it doesn't stop. It doesn't stop unless someone speaks up, unless someone breaks the silence. So, I decided I would speak. I decided I would not be erased. But I knew that when I did, there would be consequences. There would be confrontation. There would be hurt. But I could no longer ignore it. And that was when I made my decision to speak the truth, to confront them, to end the silence. But I didn't know then how much it would cost me, or how much it would change everything, because once you choose to speak, everything changes. And I was about to find out just how much. I still remember that morning vividly. The air felt different, heavy, as though it knew something had shifted. I woke up with a strange mixture of fear and determination tangled inside me. My hands were trembling as I sipped my coffee, not from the caffeine but from knowing what I had decided the night before. I was going to confront them. I didn't know exactly how I would do it yet, but I knew I couldn't go on pretending everything was fine. The day passed in a blur. Every task felt mechanical, like my body was moving but my mind was somewhere else, already preparing for what was coming. I thought about the last years, about every birthday dinner I wasn't invited to, every holiday I silently watched from the edges, every glance that felt like it carried judgment. It all came crashing down on me in that moment. When I got home, I told myself I had to be calm. I rehearsed my words in my head again and again, but as soon as I stepped inside, the familiar coldness greeted me, the subtle tension in the air. When they thought I wasn't paying attention, my heart sank. It wasn't just that they didn't invite me. It was the fact that they acted as though I didn't exist. I called him into the living room. "We need to talk," I said softly, but there was steel beneath my voice. He looked startled, like he knew what was coming. We sat down, and I told him everything, how excluded I felt, how every unspoken dinner invitation hurt more than words could explain. I told him about the night I cried, about walking in the streets trying to make sense of it all. My voice cracked more than once. He listened, or at least I thought he did, but his silence made me doubt whether he truly understood. I don't want this to break us," he said finally. I looked at him, searching for reassurance, but all I found was hesitation. That hesitation was enough to make me realize I was about to walk into something far bigger than myself. The next day, I decided to act. I invited them, all of them, to dinner at our house. Not a casual invitation, but one with intention. I wanted them to face me, to face what they'd done, without the protection of their traditions and excuses. I wanted to confront the silence that had been my pain for so long. When the day came, my heart pounded in my chest. I cooked with trembling hands, setting the table as perfectly as I could. When they arrived, there was the polite warmth, but I could see through it the avoidance in their eyes. No one spoke directly about the elephant in the room. They laughed over small talk, but the silence beneath their words was louder than anything they said. At one point, I couldn't hold back anymore. I stood up, setting my fork down. "I invited you all here because I have to say something," I started, my voice quivering but growing stronger. "For years, I've felt invisible. I've felt like I didn't belong. I wasn't invited to dinners. And it wasn't just about the foodie, it was about being left out of your lives without explanation. I'm telling you now because I need you to understand what that's done to me." There was a sharp silence. Eyes darted around the table. My own hands felt cold, but I kept going. "I'm not asking for permission to belong. I'm asking for acknowledgement. I want to know why. Because living in silence, being excluded, it's a form of rejection that hurts more than words. It's a quiet injustice." I watched them. Some looked down, some looked away. There was discomfort, yes, but also something else, something I hadn't expected. A crack, a sign that my words had landed. Then my husband spoke. "Alec, I didn't know you felt this way." His voice was softer now, almost regretful, but it wasn't enough. I knew this wasn't just about awareness, it was about change, and change was something they hadn't given me. The room was heavy after that. Conversations faltered, laughter stopped. No one knew what to say, and I knew this was the moment the story had shifted. What I had said wasn't just about me anymore, it was a mirror held up to them, to their choices, to something they had ignored for years. That night, after they left, I sat alone in the kitchen. I was exhausted, emotionally drained. but also strangely lighter. I had spoken my truth. For the first time, I had refused to be erased. But I also knew this was far from over. I had broken a silence, and silence always fights back. The following days were tense. There were fewer invitations, though I knew I wouldn't be going anyway. And every time I passed their home, or saw them in passing, the air felt different. The warmth was gone. It was replaced by something I could only describe as guarded. I started noticing the little things, the way conversations stopped when I entered the room, the way certain glances lingered just a bit too long. It was clear my confrontation had shifted something, but whether it was change or resistance, I didn't yet know. One evening, I found myself walking again. This time, I walked not in confusion but in purpose. I thought about what I had done and what I might face next. Confrontation had given me clarity, but it had also opened wounds I hadn't realized were still raw, and I began to understand that belonging isn't given, it's claimed. It's fought for, and sometimes fighting for it means standing alone. That night, I decided I wasn't going to stop. I was going to keep speaking, keep standing, even if it cost me everything, because I knew now my silence wasn't protecting me. It was protecting them, and I could no longer let that happen. But I didn't yet know what speaking up would bring. I didn't know how far this fight would take me, or how much it would change me. I only knew one thing for certain. I could no longer be silent. The days after that night felt strange, like I was living in a different version of my own life. Everything looked the same, but nothing felt the same. Even the air I breathed seemed heavier, thick, with things left unsaid. I could feel it in every glance, every half smile, every quiet avoidance. My confrontation had changed something, but I didn't yet know what. Then came the day that broke me. I was sitting at the kitchen table, staring at my coffee without drinking it, when I heard voices downstairs. They were hushed, but sharp, too deliberate to be normal family talk. I couldn't make out all the words, but one phrase cut straight to my core. "She doesn't belong here." I froze. My chest tightened. It was the first time I heard the words out loud, not in my head, not in my fears, but spoken clearly in my own home. And it hurt more than I thought it would. That sting, that cold, sharp pain that wasn't just exclusion, that was rejection, pure and unfiltered. I stood up slowly, almost holding my breath, and walked toward the door. My hands felt heavy. My heart was pounding like a drum I couldn't silence. I opened the door, and they turned, faces falling into expressions I couldn't read. There was shame, but there was also anger. And in that moment, I knew there was no turning back. I stepped forward. "Why?" I said, voice trembling but loud enough to fill the silence. "Why do you say I don't belong?" No one answered. They looked away. My stomach twisted. It was the kind of silence that speaks louder than words, and it cut me deeper than any insult ever could. For a long moment, we just stood there. Then one of them spoke, my husband's cousin. "It's complicated." His voice was low, as if even he didn't want to finish that sentence. But to me, it was enough. Enough to know that this wasn't just about dinners or traditions. This was something deeper, something rooted in old biases and unspoken truths they never wanted to face. From that day, the air between us changed completely. Family gatherings became strained. Even casual conversations were laced with tension. They looked at me differently now, not as Alec, not as family, but as someone who had dared to cross a line they had built long ago. I began to notice it everywhere. The subtle exclusions, the deliberate silences, the cold shoulders, and each time, my heart sank a little more. But deep down, I knew I had started something that could not be undone. Weeks passed, and the tension turned into confrontation. One evening, my husband came home with news that shook me. "They've decided not to include you anymore," he said softly, almost apologetically. My stomach dropped. I asked him to explain, but there was no clear answer, just vague phrases about family unity and traditions. But I knew it was more than that. It wasn't about tradition. It was about control, about keeping me in a place where my voice didn't matter, about reminding me that, no matter what I tried, I would always be on the outside. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. I thought about every unspoken dinner, every avoided conversation, every moment I had felt invisible. And I realized something terrifying. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for every person who had ever been silenced, for every quiet injustice hidden behind polite smiles. The next day, I made a decision. I wasn't going to shrink. I wasn't going to hide. I began to speak not just to them, but to friends, strangers, anyone who would listen. I told my story again and again. At first, it felt like an unbearable weight, but slowly, it became something different. It became my strength. Then came the night that would change everything. I had been invited to speak at a small community gathering about exclusion and injustice. It wasn't a huge crowd, but it felt like the right place to speak my truth. As I stood there, I looked out at faces I didn't know, and for the first time, I felt a kind of peace. I told them about the dinners I wasn't invited to, about the cold silence, about the words I heard that cut deeper than knives. I told them how it felt to be made invisible in your own life. And I told them that silence was a choice I refused to make anymore. When I finished, there was applause. Not loud, but enough to tell me they had heard me. And in that moment, something shifted inside me. I realized the fight wasn't about belonging anymore. It was about being heard. Because belonging isn't something others give you. It's something you claim by refusing to be silenced. That night, I went home feeling exhausted but alive. I knew the road ahead would be harder. I knew they would continue to resist. But I also knew that I had found my voice, and nothing could take that away. But deep inside, I also knew this was not just my story. This was a story of countless voices silenced by unspoken injustice. A story that keeps repeating in families, communities, and nations. And I wondered how many more Alec Roses are out there, fighting for a place they are told they don't deserve. After that night, something inside me shifted completely. It wasn't just about the cold dinners, the whispered words, or the silent rejection anymore. It was about the truth I could no longer keep inside me. I realized this was never just about MIT, it was about something much bigger. In the weeks that followed, I kept speaking, to friends, to strangers, even to strangers on social media. Every time I told my story, I felt my voice grow stronger, but I also felt something else, an ache. The ache of knowing that no matter how loudly I spoke, some would still choose to ignore it. It wasn't long before I faced them again. My in-law at a family event I wasn't invited to. Ironically, I heard about it from someone else. I decided I couldn't keep silent. I walked in. I wasn't supposed to be there. I knew it, but I needed to confront it one last time. I stood in the doorway, breathing in the noise and the warmth of people who didn't see me as part of their circle. For a moment, I felt the old sting, the rejection, the exclusion, but then I stepped forward, with my head held high, and looked them in the eye. I told them everything, how it felt to be left out, how their words cut deeper than any argument, how this wasn't just about me, but about respect, about humanity, about fairness. I spoke not with anger, but with something harder. Truth. There was silence. Not the quiet that hides things, but the kind that makes you know something has changed. I don't know if they understood me fully. Maybe they didn't. But I knew I had said what I needed to say. I had claimed my space, my voice, my dignity. After that night, I stopped asking permission to belong. I stopped waiting for them to invite me or include me. I started creating my own spaces where my voice was welcome, where my presence mattered. I started surrounding myself with people who made me feel seen, heard, and valued. And I realized something important. Belonging is not about being invited to someone's table, it's about building your own table and inviting people who will truly see you. But I also kept thinking about the bigger picture. How many people like me go through life believing they aren't enough because of voices that tell them so? How many remain silent because they fear the rejection, the coldness, the judgment? This isn't just my story. It's the story of countless people who are told quietly or openly that they don't belong, who face exclusion in families, workplaces, communities, who carry that pain quietly, afraid to speak up. And the truth is, silence allows injustice to keep living. Every ignored voice, every quiet rejection, becomes part of a larger pattern that repeats itself until someone breaks it. So I broke it, not for everyone, but for me, and for anyone who has ever felt unseen, unheard, unwanted. Because the world doesn't change if we keep quiet. Change begins when someone dares to speak the truth. I still feel pain when I think about those family dinners I never got to attend. I still feel a knot in my chest when I remember the way they looked at me that night. But I've also learned something powerful. Pain can become purpose. And my purpose now is to speak not just for myself, but for every Alec Rose who's been told she doesn't belong. Because belonging is not something you're given, it's something you claim. And the question isn't whether they'll invite you, it's whether you will choose to sit at your own table anyway. So, I ask you this: how many more Alec Roses are still waiting? How many are still hiding their voices to avoid rejection? And how many more have to suffer in silence before the world finally wakes up and listens? That's my story. my truth, and I'm not going to be silent about it anymore.